October 12th, 1949. Montana's Bitterroot Valley. A sharp autumn wind cut across James Calloway's ranch as he scanned the horizon, his weathered hands gripping a thermos of coffee that had long since gone cold. 6 years had passed since he'd returned from the Pacific, trading the thunderous chaos of Guadalcanal for the deafening silence of 500 acres that stretched out before him like an ocean of grass. He was certain that this solitude, this self-imposed exile, was exactly what he needed to forget what the war had taken from him. He could not have known that by nightfall everything he believed about peace, forgiveness, and healing would be challenged in ways he never imagined. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. This is the remarkable, true account of how one embittered veteran's encounter with former enemies would transform not just his life, but our understanding of how healing after conflict can come from the most unexpected quarters. James Calloway, 32 years old, former sergeant of the 1st Marine Division, had become something of a local mystery in Ravalli County. The residents of nearby Hamilton whispered about the decorated Marine who returned from the war, only to retreat further from society with each passing season. Some said he was haunted by what he'd seen in the Pacific. Others claimed he was simply bitter that the world had moved on while he was fighting. Whatever the truth, Calloway had reduced his trips to town to once-monthly supply runs, exchanging few words with merchants beyond what was necessary. "Morning, Mr. Calloway," said Ruth Pearson, the proprietor of Hamilton's general store, as the Marine placed his usual list on the counter. "Got everything on here except the canned peaches. Shipment's been delayed again." Calloway nodded, his expression unchanging. "That's fine." "Beautiful day out there," Ruth continued, determined as always to extract more than 3 words from the man. "Folks are saying winter might come early this year." "They always say that." Calloway counted out exact change, placing it deliberately on the counter. Ruth sighed, abandoning her attempt at conversation as she began gathering his supplies. "Oh, before I forget, Dorothy at the post office asked me to give you this. Came in yesterday." She handed him a letter bearing government seals. Calloway tucked it into his jacket pocket without examining it. "Aren't you curious what it's about?" Ruth couldn't help asking. "Government only writes when they want something," he replied flatly. "Nothing urgent enough that can't wait till I get home." What Calloway couldn't have known was that the letter would upend the careful isolation he had constructed. It contained a request from the Department of State regarding a matter that would soon arrive at his doorstep, whether he consented or not. The drive back to his ranch took 45 minutes along winding roads that transitioned from pavement to gravel to dirt. With each mile, Calloway felt the tightness in his chest ease as the distance between himself and town increased. His property came into view as he crested the final hill, a sprawling acreage with a 2-story farmhouse, 3 outbuildings and pastures that stretched toward the mountains. It wasn't much to look at anymore, peeling paint on the barn, missing shingles on the roof, but it was his, inherited from an uncle he barely knew but who had no closer relatives. Inside the kitchen, Calloway finally pulled out the letter, slicing it open with a pocket knife. He scanned its contents, his expression darkening with each line. "Absolutely not," he muttered, crumpling the paper and tossing it toward the stove. The letter, signed by a Howard Ellison of the State Department's Displaced Persons Commission, explained that 10 German women, former auxiliary personnel who had been held as prisoners of war in the United States, were being relocated as part of a repatriation program. Due to complications with their return to Germany, they required temporary housing. Calloway's ranch had been identified as a suitable location, given its size, relative isolation, and, most ironically to Calloway, its owner's distinguished service record, and demonstrated commitment to American values. "Distinguished service," Calloway muttered, pouring himself 2 fingers of whiskey. "Is that what they call it now?" He stared out the window at the setting sun, memories surfacing unbidden, the jungle heat of Guadalcanal, the faces of Marines from his unit, Johnson, Martinez, the Patel brothers, young Miller who lied about his age to enlist. All gone now, Calloway had no intention of housing German women, former enemies, on his property. He would write back tomorrow, refuse the request, remind them that his service to his country was complete. But even as these thoughts hardened in his mind, another vehicle was making its way toward his ranch, a government car carrying Howard Ellison himself, who had anticipated resistance and decided a personal visit would be more effective than correspondence. The knock came just as Calloway was preparing a simple dinner of beans and bread. "Mr. Calloway, James Calloway?" The voice belonged to a slender man in his 40s, dressed in a suit that immediately marked him as a government official. "Howard Ellison, Department of State. May I come in? It's rather cold out here." Calloway stood in the doorway, deliberately blocking the entrance. "You've wasted your time, Mr. Ellison. My answer is no." "I understand your reluctance," Ellison said, seemingly unperturbed by the chilly reception. "Perhaps you might at least hear the details before deciding. These women—" "I read your letter," Calloway interrupted. "Not interested in housing Germans, or anyone else for that matter." Ellison nodded slowly. "Yes, well, the situation has evolved somewhat since that letter was drafted. May I?" He gestured toward the interior of the house. Something in the man's tone, a note of urgency, perhaps, made Calloway step aside, allowing Ellison to enter. "You have 5 minutes," Calloway said, closing the door. Inside, Ellison surveyed the sparse but tidy kitchen before turning back to Calloway. "The women in question are already in Montana, Mr. Calloway. They arrived at Missoula 3 days ago. The arrangement we had for their housing fell through yesterday, when the property owner suffered a heart attack." "That's unfortunate. Still doesn't change my answer." "There are 10 women, Mr. Calloway, all between 23 and 35 years old. They were auxiliary personnel, secretaries, telephone operators, nurses, not combatants. They were captured in North Africa in 1943 and have been held at various POW camps since then, most recently at Fort Missoula." "6 years as prisoners," Calloway remarked, despite himself. "The war's been over for 4. "Indeed," Ellison nodded. "Repatriation has been complicated. Many of their homes are now in Soviet-controlled territory. Their families scattered or lost. The processing of female POWs has not been a priority, I'm afraid." Calloway remained impassive. "Still doesn't explain why they're my problem." "They're not asking for charity, Mr. Calloway. They're willing to work. Several have agricultural experience. They need temporary placement, 6 months at most, while their permanent resettlement is arranged." Ellison paused, studying Calloway's expression. "They would stay in the bunkhouse, not your home. The government will provide a stipend for their upkeep, plus compensation for you." Calloway's jaw tightened. "I don't want government money." "Then consider it payment for their labor," Ellison countered smoothly. "Your ranch could use the help, if you don't mind my saying so. I noticed several repairs that—" "No," Calloway cut him off. "Find somewhere else." Ellison sighed, removing his glasses to clean them with a handkerchief. "Mr. Calloway, I'll be frank. There is nowhere else, not within the required time frame. These women will be transported to your property tomorrow morning. You can accept them with grace and the government's gratitude, or you can turn them away, in which case I'll be forced to note your refusal to assist in an official program supported by the President himself." The implied threat hung in the air between them. "That's how it is, then?" Calloway finally said. "No actual choice in the matter." "There's always choice," Ellison replied, replacing his glasses. "I'm merely outlining the consequences." Calloway turned away, staring out the window at the darkness that had settled over his land. 6 months, not a day more. "Excellent," Ellison said, clearly relieved. "They'll arrive at approximately 10 tomorrow morning. I'll handle the introductions myself." After Ellison departed, Calloway sat alone at his kitchen table, the untouched beans growing cold. He had fought across the Pacific for 4 years, survived horrors he still couldn't speak of, only to have his hard-won peace invaded by the aftermath of a war fought on the other side of the world. "This is a mistake," he said aloud to the empty room. Sleep evaded Calloway that night. He rose before dawn, as was his habit, and set about preparing the bunkhouse. It was a long, low building that had once housed seasonal workers when the ranch was a productive operation under his uncle's management. It contained 12 simple beds, a communal area with a wood stove, and basic washing facilities. Calloway had maintained it minimally over the years, occasionally using it for storage. Now he swept the floors, checked for leaks in the roof, and ensured the stove was operational. It was Spartan but serviceable. At precisely 10 in the morning, 2 vehicles appeared on the horizon, Ellison's government car followed by a military transport truck. Calloway watched their approach from the porch, his face set in what the Marines had once called his granite expression. The vehicles pulled up to the front of the house. Ellison emerged first, adjusting his hat against the wind. The truck's rear doors opened and women began to descend one by one, each carrying a small suitcase or bundle. They formed a line as if at inspection, facing Calloway across 20 feet of Montana dirt. "Mr. Calloway," Ellison called, gesturing him forward, "allow me to introduce your guests." Reluctantly, Calloway descended the porch steps. Up close, the women were not what he had expected. Their clothes were mismatched American donations, too large or too small, but clean and neatly arranged. They stood with straight backs, chins lifted, eyes forward. Military discipline, Calloway recognized, even in civilians. "Ladies," Ellison began in English, "this is Mr. James Calloway, your host for the coming months. Mr. Calloway, may I present Fräulein Müller, the appointed representative of the group." A tall woman with honey-brown hair pulled back in a severe bun stepped forward. She appeared to be in her early 30s, with intelligent eyes that assessed Calloway with neither fear nor deference. "Herr Calloway," she said in accented but clear English, "I am Elsa Müller. We are grateful for your accommodation." She extended her hand. After a moment's hesitation, Calloway shook it briefly. Her grip was firm, her hand calloused, not the hand of someone who had spent the war behind a desk, despite what Ellison had claimed. "The bunkhouse is ready," Calloway said stiffly. "I'll show you." As they walked toward the outbuilding, Calloway became aware of the women taking in their surroundings with careful attention. One nodded appreciatively at the layout of the property. Another noticed the vegetable garden, now mostly harvested but still showing signs of careful planning. A third assessed the condition of the barn with a critical eye. Inside the bunkhouse, Calloway gestured to the space. Beds, stove, washing area in back. Outhouse is 50 feet behind the building. Water pump is shared. It's between here and the main house. Elsa Müller translated his words into German for the benefit of those with less English. There were nods, a few murmured comments. "We will keep it clean," Müller assured him. "We are used to much worse conditions." "I'm sure you are," Calloway replied, more sharply than he intended. "I'll leave you to get settled." As he turned to leave, one of the younger women stepped forward. She couldn't have been more than 25, with dark blonde hair and a scar that ran from her left ear down her neck, disappearing beneath her collar. "Excuse, please, Darty," she said haltingly. "We may fix things, make better." Calloway frowned. "What do you mean?" Müller intervened. "Hannah was a carpenter before the war. She notices the roof needs repair." She pointed to a corner where water damage was evident. "We can work. We want to work." "You've been here 5 minutes," Calloway said, incredulous. "We have been prisoners for 6 years, another woman spoke up, her English better than the others. "We know how to assess a space quickly for what must be improved." Calloway looked from face to face, seeing not subservience but capability, not defeat but determination. These women had survived captivity, displacement, uncertainty, and now they stood before him offering to repair his roof. "Do what you want with the bunkhouse," he finally said. "Tools are in the barn. Don't touch anything else without asking first." With that, he left them to organize themselves, retreating to the main house where Ellison waited with paperwork requiring signatures. "They seem capable," Ellison observed as Calloway signed the last form. "We'll see," Calloway replied noncommittally. After Ellison departed, promising to return in 2 weeks to check on the situation, Calloway watched from his kitchen window as the women established themselves. They moved with efficiency, assigning beds, unpacking their meager belongings, and then, to his surprise, immediately beginning an assessment of the bunkhouse's deficiencies. By late afternoon, 2 of them were on the roof, examining the damaged section, while others cleaned the windows and cleared debris from the rain gutters. That evening, as darkness fell, Calloway brought them additional blankets, anticipating the night's chill. He found them seated around the wood stove, conversing quietly in German. They fell silent at his entrance. "Extra blankets," he said, placing the stack on a nearby chair. "Temperature drops at night. Stove wood is stacked outside. Help yourselves." "Thank you, Herr Calloway," Müller responded. "We have prepared a schedule for chores and repairs. Perhaps tomorrow you might review it? Tell us what work you would find most valuable." Calloway hadn't expected this level of organization or initiative. "Fine, morning will do." As he turned to leave, the woman named Hannah spoke again. "We heard. You fought in Pacific?" Calloway stiffened. "Who told you that?" "The man, Ellison," Müller explained. "He said you were decorated Marine, fought in Pacific Islands." "That's not relevant to any of you," Calloway said coldly. One of the older women, who had remained silent until now, spoke in German. Müller translated. "Greta says her brother fought in Africa. He did not return." Calloway looked at the woman. Grey streaked her dark hair and lines of grief etched her face. For a moment he saw not a German, but simply a woman who had lost family to the same war that had claimed his friends. "Many didn't return," he said finally, his tone softer. "From all sides." He left them then, unwilling to continue the conversation, yet troubled by the unexpected moment of connection. Back in his house, he poured himself a drink and sat by the fireplace, watching flames consume pine logs with mechanical efficiency. He tried to recapture his earlier resentment, to reinforce the walls between himself and these unwanted guests, but found it strangely difficult. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Calloway rose at his usual hour and was surprised to see smoke already rising from the bunkhouse chimney. Outside, he found two of the women at the water pump, filling buckets. They nodded respectfully as he passed. After breakfast, Müller approached the main house, knocking politely on the kitchen door. She carried a neatly written list. "Good morning, Herr Calloway," she said when he answered. "Our work proposal, as promised." Calloway scanned the list. They had organized themselves into teams based on skills: agricultural work, animal husbandry, carpentry and repair, cooking and preservation, cleaning and maintenance. They proposed a comprehensive schedule of improvements to the bunkhouse and offered to extend their efforts to the main property if he approved. "This is thorough," he admitted. "We wish to earn our keep," Müller stated simply, "and we prefer to be busy." Calloway studied her face, trying to reconcile this capable, organized woman with his preconceptions of Germans, particularly German women during the war. "What did you do before you were captured?" Müller's expression remained composed. "I was a mathematics teacher. Then I was conscripted to calculate artillery trajectories." "A mathematician working as a POW for 6 years, Calloway observed. "Seems like a waste." "War is full of waste, Herr Calloway," she replied evenly, "as I believe you know." Before he could respond, they were interrupted by the sound of a vehicle approaching, unusual given the ranch's isolation. A battered pickup truck appeared, driven by Calloway's nearest neighbor, Frank Billings, whose property began 3 miles to the east. "Looks like you have a visitor," Müller said. "I will wait for your decision on our proposal." She retreated toward the bunkhouse as Billings parked. Frank Billings was a man of 60, with the weathered face of someone who had spent his life outdoors. He had largely respected Calloway's desire for privacy over the years, limiting their interactions to occasional assistance with tasks requiring more than one person. "Morning, Calloway," Billings called, eyeing the retreating figure of Müller with undisguised curiosity. "Heard you had some visitors." "News travels fast," Calloway remarked dryly. "Small county," Billings shrugged. "Ellison stopped for gas in Hamilton. Mentioned he'd placed some German women out at your place." He paused, clearly waiting for elaboration. Calloway sighed. "Government program, temporary arrangement." "German women," Billings repeated. "POWs." "Former POWs," Calloway corrected. "They'll be here 6 months while paperwork gets sorted." Billings whistled. "Mighty interesting development for a man who barely speaks to his American neighbors." "Not my choice," Calloway said flatly. "Government didn't give me much option." "Well," Billings said, removing his hat to scratch his head, "thought I'd offer help if you need it. Can't imagine it's easy suddenly having 10 women to look after." "They look after themselves," Calloway replied. gesturing toward the bunkhouse where several women were already at work on the roof. Seem capable enough. Billings watched the activity with interest. I'll be damned. Germans, you say? Working like that? Is that surprising? Just different from what folks might expect, Billings said thoughtfully. After all we heard during the war, Calloway found himself unexpectedly defensive. They're people doing what people do, trying to survive. No different than anyone else. Billings gave him a curious look. That's more words than I've heard you string together in months, Calloway. He replaced his hat. Well, offer stands if you need anything. My wife said to invite you all for Sunday dinner, but I told her that might be pushing it. After Billings departed, Calloway returned to the list Muller had provided. He made a few adjustments, approved most of their proposals, and added a note about the northern fence line that needed repair before winter. When he brought the annotated list to the bunkhouse, he found the women already organized into their work groups. Hannah and another woman, introduced as Brigitte, were measuring lumber for roof repairs. 3 others were turning soil in the small garden plot behind the bunkhouse, preparing it for spring planting they might never see. The rest were engaged in thoroughly cleaning the building's interior. Your plan is fine, Calloway told Miller, handing back the list. I added the north fence to the repairs. It borders Billings' property, the man who just visited. Needs to be solid before snow comes. We will add it to our schedule, Miller nodded. Thank you for the opportunity to be useful. As Calloway turned to leave, the woman named Greta, the one who had lost her brother, approached. In halting English, she asked, You have garden tools we may use for this soil? She gestured to the plot being prepared. In the tool shed, Calloway replied. Help yourself. Greta smiled, the first genuine smile he had seen from any of them. Thank you, growing things. It heals the heart, yes? Calloway didn't answer, but the woman's words stayed with him as he went about his own work that day. Growing things, healing hearts. Such simple concepts, yet so distant from his existence these past years. The days fell into a routine. Calloway maintained his solitary habits, working his section of the ranch, while the women transformed their living space and gradually extended their efforts to the broader property. They respected his privacy, never approaching the main house uninvited, yet their presence was evident everywhere. In repaired fences, in cleaned gutters, in a vegetable garden expanded and prepared for the next season's planting. 2 weeks after their arrival, Howard Ellison returned as promised. He found Calloway splitting firewood near the barn. Mr. Calloway, Ellison called, approaching with his briefcase. How are our guests settling in? Fine, Calloway replied, embedding his axe in the chopping block. No problems. Excellent, excellent, Ellison beamed. I've brought the first stipend payment and some additional paperwork. He glanced around. Might I see the ladies? Check on their welfare? They're at the north fence line, Calloway said, pointing. Been working on it since yesterday. Ellison's eyebrows rose. All of them in this cold? They rotate, Calloway explained. 5 on fence duty, others handling cooking and repairs closer to home. They set up the system themselves. I see, Ellison said, clearly impressed. Well, shall we go find them? The walk to the north fence took 20 minutes across increasingly uneven terrain. As they approached, they could see 5 women working in coordinated fashion, 2 holding posts steady, 1 mixing concrete in a wheelbarrow, 2 others stringing wire between already set posts. My word, Ellison murmured, they certainly are industrious. Müller, who was directing the concrete mixing, spotted them first. Herr Ellison, she called, straightening. Welcome back. The women paused in their work, gathering as Ellison and Calloway approached. Ladies, Ellison greeted them warmly. You all look well. How are you finding your accommodation? Very satisfactory, Müller responded. We have made improvements. Herr Calloway has been most accommodating. Calloway noticed she chose her words carefully, neither overstating his hospitality nor complaining about his aloofness. Ellison spent an hour with the women, first in a group, and then speaking privately with each one to ensure they were being treated properly. Calloway waited by a nearby tree, watching clouds gather over the mountains to the west. Snow was coming, perhaps within days. They speak very highly of you, Ellison said when he returned. Say you're fair and respectful of their privacy. Calloway shrugged. Haven't done much except let them work. Sometimes that's exactly what people need, Ellison observed. Dignity through useful labor. On the walk back, Ellison broached a new subject. There's been a development regarding their case, Mr. Calloway. What kind of development? The processing of their paperwork has hit a snag, Ellison explained carefully. There are questions about two of the women, Müller and the one called Brigitte Weber. Intelligence reports suggest they may have had more significant roles during the conflict than initially documented. Calloway frowned. What does that mean for them? Nothing certain yet, Ellison said, but it could delay their resettlement. I thought you should know, as it might extend their stay somewhat beyond the 6 months originally discussed. Calloway was surprised to find he felt more concern than annoyance at this news. What kind of roles are we talking about? I'm not at liberty to discuss specifics, Ellison demurred. Simply be aware that there may be additional questioning, perhaps visits from other departments. That evening, after Ellison had gone, Calloway found himself walking toward the bunkhouse. Light spilled from its windows, and as he approached, he heard singing, a German folk song harmonized by several voices. He paused, listening to the melancholy melody carried on the cold air. He had not intended to eavesdrop, but something in the music held him rooted to the spot. It spoke of homeland, of loss, of longing. Emotions he recognized intimately, though he didn't understand the words. When the song ended, he continued to the door and knocked. The singing immediately stopped, replaced by sudden tension he could feel even through the wooden door. Müller answered, surprise evident on her face. Herr Calloway, is something wrong? No, he said. May I come in? The interior of the bunkhouse had been transformed. Colorful fabric, likely from donated clothes, had been repurposed into curtains and cushion covers. The beds were neatly made with precision that would have impressed his drill sergeant. A collection of pine cones and dried flowers adorned a shelf that hadn't existed 2 weeks ago. The women had been seated around the stove, but rose at his entrance. He noticed they had arranged the space to create a communal area, pushing beds against walls to maximize the central gathering place. I heard singing, Calloway said, suddenly unsure why he had come. A song from Bavaria, one of the younger women explained, about mountains and home. Calloway nodded. It's going to snow tomorrow. Heavy from the look of the clouds. You should finish what you can on the fence and plan to stay inside for a couple of days. We noticed the weather signs as well, Müller agreed. The fence section is nearly complete. Calloway hesitated, then continued. Ellison mentioned there might be complications with some of your paperwork. It could mean staying longer than 6 months. A shadow crossed Müller's face. Did he say which of us? No, Calloway lied, not wanting to single anyone out. Just that there were questions to be resolved. The women exchanged glances, a current of unspoken communication passing between them. Thank you for telling us, Müller finally said. We have learned to be patient with bureaucracy. The roof should hold against the snow, Hannah offered, clearly changing the subject. We reinforced the weak sections. Good, Calloway nodded. If you need anything during the storm, the main house is always open. It was the first time he had extended such an invitation, and he saw the significance register on their faces. Thank you, Müller said softly. That is very kind. Calloway left shortly after, returning to his house through the darkness. The first snowflakes began to fall as he reached his porch, large, wet flakes that promised substantial accumulation. Inside, he built up the fire and sat in his usual chair, but found his thoughts continually drifting to the women in the bunkhouse. They had been prisoners for 6 years, and now they faced more uncertainty, more waiting. Yet they worked without complaint, sang songs of home and created beauty from cast-off materials. The snow continued through the night, and Calloway woke to a world transformed, white and silent, the familiar landscape rendered new under winter's first blanket. He made extra coffee, filled a thermos, and on impulse, baked cornbread from his mother's recipe, something he hadn't done in years. By mid-morning, the snowfall had lightened, but left nearly 8 inches blanketing the ranch. Calloway bundled up and made his way to the bunkhouse, thermos and cornbread wrapped in a towel under his arm. He found the women already awake and organized. 2 were clearing snow from the entrance. Others were reinforcing the windows with extra fabric to block drafts. "Brought coffee and cornbread," Calloway announced, holding up his offerings. "Thought you might appreciate something warm." The gesture, simple as it was, clearly surprised them. Miller recovered first, ushering him inside where the wood stove radiated blessed heat. "This is very thoughtful, Herr Calloway," she said as he set the items on their makeshift table. "Please join us." Calloway hesitated only briefly before accepting a seat. Hannah distributed the cornbread, while Greta poured coffee into an assortment of mismatched cups. For several moments, they ate in awkward silence. "This bread," one of the younger women finally said, "it is different from German bread, but very good. My mother's recipe," Calloway found himself explaining. "Southern style, she was from Georgia." "You have family there still?" asked another woman. Brigitte, he recalled, one of those Ellison had mentioned. Calloway shook his head. "No living family. Parents gone before the war, no siblings." "Same for many of us," Mueller observed quietly. "War takes more than just those who die in it." The simple truth of her statement hung in the air, creating an unexpected moment of shared understanding. "The snow will keep us inside today," Calloway said, changing the subject. "I noticed you've been collecting firewood. You have enough?" "Yes, sufficient for several days," Mueller assured him. "We have been preparing for winter since our arrival." "Of course you have," Calloway acknowledged, a hint of admiration creeping into his voice. "You've thought of everything. When you have nothing," Greta said in her halting English, "you learn to plan carefully, to waste nothing." Calloway nodded, understanding perfectly. The Marines had taught similar lessons, though in different circumstances. If the storm worsens, move to the main house. It has a better heating system. As he rose to leave, the woman named Brigitte, the one with better English, approached him. "May I ask something, Herr Calloway?" He nodded cautiously. "The books in your house? I have seen them through windows. Do you perhaps have any you might lend? We have read our few books many times over." Calloway hadn't considered that intellectual hunger might be as real as physical need. "I'll bring some over later." That afternoon, Calloway selected a dozen books from his shelves, novels mostly, some history, a book of poetry his mother had loved. When he delivered them to the bunkhouse, the women received them as if he'd brought gold, handling each volume with reverence. "This one," Brigitte said, holding up Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls, "I have heard of but never read." "It's about the Spanish Civil War," Calloway explained. "You might find it relevant." "War stories written by those who know," Mueller observed, examining the book. "These are valuable." "You read English well enough?" Calloway asked. "Some better than others," Mueller replied. "Those who read best will translate for the rest. It gives us purpose during long evenings." The snow continued intermittently for 3 days, confining everyone to their respective buildings. On the 4th morning, Calloway was clearing a path from his house when he spotted movement near the tree line, a deer limping badly through the deep snow. He watched as the animal struggled forward, its left foreleg clearly injured. Under normal circumstances, he might have considered it a convenient hunting opportunity. Instead, he found himself thinking about Greta's words. "Growing things heals the heart." Later that day, a knock at his door revealed Mueller, accompanied by the youngest of the women, whose name he now recalled was Lisa. "Forgive the interruption," Mueller began, but Lisa noticed a wounded deer near the eastern field. She was a veterinary assistant before the war, and wonders if you have medical supplies she might use. Calloway was momentarily speechless. "You want to treat a wounded deer?" "It will not survive winter with such an injury," Lisa explained earnestly, "but with treatment, perhaps." "We understand if you prefer to hunt it," Mueller added quickly. "Food is valuable and—" "No," Calloway interrupted. "I saw it this morning. Had the same thought, actually." He stepped back from the door. "Come in. I have a first aid kit that might help." Inside, he retrieved the comprehensive medical kit he'd maintained out of military habit. As he handed it over, Lisa examined the contents with professional interest. "This is excellent," she said. "May I use the bandages and antiseptic?" "Take what you need," Calloway replied. Then, surprising himself, he added, I'll help you find it. The three of them tracked the deer to a sheltered area beneath a cluster of pines where it had bedded down. Approaching slowly, Lisa spoke in soft German that seemed to calm the frightened animal. With Calloway and Müller's help, she managed to clean and bandage the leg wound, likely caused by barbed wire, while keeping the deer relatively still. It may need additional treatment, Lisa explained as they backed away, but this will prevent infection. You've done this before, Calloway observed. With wild animals, I mean. Lisa nodded. In Germany, before. And in the camp. We sometimes treated injured birds or rabbits that came near the fences. The guards allowed it if we were discreet. Small mercies, Müller remarked with an unreadable expression. As they walked back to the ranch buildings, Calloway found himself curious about their experiences. The POW camp, was it bad? Müller and Lisa exchanged glances. It was not like the camps in Europe, Müller finally said. We had enough food, no beatings, but confinement is confinement, and uncertainty is its own punishment. 6 years is a long time to wait, Calloway acknowledged. The first years during actual conflict we understood, Lisa added. But after the war ended, she shrugged, we became an administrative problem. Paperwork no one wanted to process. People forgotten by both sides, Müller concluded. Calloway thought about his own return from the Pacific, the parades and ceremonies followed by rapid public forgetfulness as America rushed toward its peacetime future. Different circumstances, but perhaps not entirely dissimilar emotions. Well, he said as they reached the bunkhouse, you're not forgotten here. The words emerged unbidden, surprising him as much as the women. Müller studied his face for a moment before nodding. Thank you, Herr Calloway. That means more than you might guess. As December settled over the ranch, a new rhythm established itself. The women continued their work when weather permitted, moving indoors to sew, repair, and improve their living space when conditions worsened. Calloway found himself increasingly impressed by their resilience and ingenuity. From limited materials, they created comforts and solved problems with resourcefulness born of necessity. Twice more, Howard Ellison visited. During his second visit, in early December, he took Müller and Brigitte aside for private questioning that lasted over 2 hours. When they returned to the bunkhouse, both women were subdued. Everything all right? Calloway asked Müller later, catching her alone near the barn. She hesitated before answering. They have questions about our work during the war. They believe we had more responsibility than we claimed. Did you? Calloway asked bluntly. Müller met his gaze steadily. I told you I calculated artillery trajectories. What I did not say is that I eventually supervised 30 other women doing the same. And Brigitte? She was a telephone operator, yes, but at a headquarters where she heard things she was not supposed to hear. That makes you dangerous somehow? Information is always dangerous, Herr Calloway, Müller replied, especially when held by the defeated. Calloway considered this. What will happen to you? More questioning, most likely, perhaps separate processing from the others. She looked away toward the mountains. It could mean I stay in America permanently, unable to return to Germany. Would that be so terrible? Calloway asked, surprising himself with the question. Müller's expression softened slightly. There are worse fates than remaining in Montana, I suppose. The days grew shorter as winter deepened. Calloway found himself increasingly drawn to the warmth and unexpected camaraderie of the bunkhouse. What began as brief visits to discuss work plans extended into evenings of conversation, shared meals, and cultural exchange. He learned that Greta had been a skilled cook before the war and had maintained a renowned restaurant in Munich. When he mentioned his fondness for apple pie, she insisted on making one from the ranch's stored apples, producing a pastry that surpassed any he'd tasted since his mother's. Hannah, the carpenter, taught him German techniques for joinery that required no nails, knowledge passed down through generations of her family's woodworking business. Together, they crafted a new dining table for the bunkhouse, more substantial than the makeshift surface they'd been using. In return, Calloway gradually shared pieces of his own story, his childhood in the South, his decision to join the Marines, carefully selected memories of comrades who had fought alongside him. He avoided the worst horrors of Guadalcanal and Peleliu, but found unexpected relief in speaking about Johnson's terrible jokes or Martinez's talent for finding fresh fruit in seemingly barren jungle terrain. As Christmas approached, Calloway noticed the women growing quieter, more introspective. He recognized the look, the same one he'd worn during his first holidays after returning home. The awareness of empty chairs, of voices that would never again join in celebration. On December 23rd, he drove into Hamilton and returned with a small pine tree strapped to his truck, along with packages wrapped in brown paper. That evening, he knocked on the bunkhouse door, the tree under his arm. "Thought you might want this," he said gruffly when Muller answered. "For Christmas." The women gathered around as he brought the tree inside, exclaiming in delighted German. Within hours, they had transformed it using handcrafted decorations, paper stars, pine cones dipped in melted candle wax, strings of dried berries. The result was both humble and beautiful, a testament to creativity born of scarcity. On Christmas Eve, Calloway invited them to the main house for dinner. He had spent days preparing, cleaning rooms long unused, planning a meal that incorporated both American traditions and German dishes the women had described. When they arrived, dressed in their best available clothes, their faces illuminated by lantern light, Calloway felt something shift inside him, as if some frozen part had finally begun to thaw. The meal was far from perfect. The roast was slightly overdone. The dumplings Greta had taught him to make were heavier than intended, but the atmosphere transformed his drafty farmhouse into something he had not experienced in years, a home. After dinner, at Calloway's encouragement, they sang carols in both languages, teaching each other melodies that crossed the boundaries of nation and conflict. When they sang Silent Night together, Stille Nacht in German, then in English, Calloway was startled to find tears threatening. He disguised the moment by busying himself with coffee, but Muller noticed, her perceptive eyes missing little. Later, as the evening drew to a close, Calloway presented each woman with a small gift, practical items mostly, new gloves or scarves purchased in Hamilton, but also a book of English poetry for Brigitte, a set of cooking spices for Greta, carpentry tools for Hannah. "This is unexpected kindness, Herr Calloway," Muller said as she accepted her gift, a fountain pen with her initials engraved on its side. "Not kindness," Calloway corrected. "Appreciation. For all you've done here." The women exchanged glances, and then Lisa stepped forward, presenting Calloway with a package wrapped in fabric. "We have something for you as well," she explained, "made by all of us." Inside was a hand-knitted sweater of remarkable craftsmanship, created from wool they had carefully unraveled from donated garments and re-dyed using natural materials from around the ranch. "We noticed yours was quite worn," Muller explained. "This should be warmer." Calloway ran his fingers over the intricate pattern. "I don't know what to say." "You have said enough already," Muller replied softly, "with actions more than words." January brought the harshest weather of the winter, temperatures that plummeted to 20 below zero, and winds that drove snow into drifts taller than a man. During one particularly severe storm, Calloway insisted the women relocate to the main house, where the heating system was more reliable. They established themselves in the rarely used parlor and dining room, creating sleeping areas that could be rearranged during the day. The arrangement, initially intended as temporary, extended as the severe weather continued. Calloway discovered that having others in the house, their voices, their movement, their presence, filled a void he hadn't fully acknowledged. The silence that had once seemed peaceful now felt empty when they occasionally returned to the bunkhouse on milder days. It was during this period of shared living that Howard Ellison arrived for his most significant visit, accompanied by 2 officials from the State Department. They came unannounced one afternoon in late January, their government vehicle struggling through the snow-covered access road. "Mr. Calloway," Ellison greeted him tensely, "we need to speak with you and the women, particularly Fräulein Müller and Fräulein Weber." The officials introduced themselves as representatives of the Immigration Bureau and requested a private space for interviews. Calloway directed them to his study, watching with growing concern as Müller and Brigitte were questioned separately, each interview lasting over an hour. "What's this about?" Calloway demanded of Ellison while they waited in the kitchen. New information has surfaced regarding their wartime activities, Ellison explained reluctantly. There are some in Washington who believe certain women in this group may have had knowledge of military significance, information that was not disclosed during their initial processing. They've been prisoners for 6 years, Calloway said incredulously. Whatever they knew is long outdated. It's not just about tactical information, Ellison lowered his voice. There are questions about their levels of involvement with the regime. Calloway felt a surge of protectiveness. These women are not Nazis, Ellison. They're people who were caught in a war not of their making, just like millions of others. That's what we're here to determine, Ellison replied. The process must be thorough. When the interviews concluded, the officials emerged with stern expressions. The senior official addressed Calloway directly. Mr. Calloway, based on our investigation, we have determined that Elsa Mueller and Brigitte Weber will require additional processing. They will need to return with us to Fort Missoula tomorrow for extended questioning. For how long? Calloway demanded. Undetermined at this point, the man replied smoothly. The matter is now one of national security. That's bureaucratic nonsense, Calloway stated flatly. These women have been here for months. If they were security threats, there would have been some indication. Nevertheless, our orders are clear. We'll return tomorrow morning to transport them. The officials nodded curtly and departed, leaving Ellison behind to manage the details. I'm sorry, Calloway, Ellison said once they were alone. This is beyond my authority now. That evening, tension hung over the house. The women spoke in hushed German, clustering around Mueller and Brigitte. Calloway found himself pacing, anger building with each passing hour. Near midnight, unable to sleep, he found Mueller sitting alone in the kitchen, a cup of tea growing cold before her. They won't tell me how long this questioning will last, she said without preamble, or what will happen afterward. Calloway sat across from her. Ellison implied there were questions about your involvement with the Nazi regime. Miller's expression hardened. I was never a party member. Neither was Brigitte. We were assigned our duties because of our skills, not our politics. She paused. But in such times, refusal meant consequences, so we did our work and tried to survive. Like most people would, Calloway acknowledged, the Americans want someone to blame, Mueller continued. The true architects of horror are being tried at Nuremberg, but that is not enough. There is a need to find guilt everywhere, to justify the suffering on all sides. Calloway understood this impulse all too well. After losing friends in the Pacific, he had nursed a similar need to assign blame, to find meaning in senseless loss. What will you do? He asked. Mueller's shoulders straightened, her teacher's discipline evident. What I have always done. Answer truthfully and endure. The next morning, Calloway was up before dawn. He found Frank Billings in Hamilton and made a telephone call to a man he had not contacted in years, Colonel Thomas Whitmore, his former commanding officer, now working at the Pentagon. The conversation was brief but intense, Calloway calling in the single favor he had never asked for despite numerous offers. When the officials arrived to collect Mueller and Brigitte, they found Calloway waiting on the porch, stance wide, arms crossed. There's been a change of plans, he informed them as they approached. The senior official frowned. Our orders are clear, Mr. Calloway. Your orders have been superseded, Calloway replied calmly. If you check with your office, you'll find new instructions. The men exchanged glances before the junior official returned to their vehicle and used the radio. After several minutes of terse conversation, he returned, his expression confused. Sir, headquarters says the women are to remain here pending further review. A Colonel Whitmore has intervened in the matter. The senior official's face flushed with anger. This is highly irregular. So is holding women as prisoners years after a war has ended, Calloway countered, and questioning their loyalty based on jobs they were forced to perform. After the officials departed, promising this wasn't the end of the matter, Mueller approached Calloway in the barn where he was splitting wood with particular vigor. What did you do? She asked directly. Calloway set down the axe. Called in a favor from someone who owes me, someone with enough rank to make those bureaucrats back off, at least temporarily. Why would you do this for us? Calloway considered the question carefully. Because I've seen enough injustice in war. don't need to see more in peace. Müller studied him with those perceptive eyes. There is more to it than that, I think. Maybe, Calloway admitted. Maybe I've learned something these past months. What would that be? Calloway gestured toward the ranch, the repaired fences, the maintained buildings, the signs of care and attention that had been absent for years. That healing doesn't come from isolation. It comes from purpose, from connection. He paused. You all reminded me of that. Müller's expression softened. We have learned similar lessons here. February brought gradual warming and the first hints that winter's grip was loosening. The women returned to the bunkhouse as temperatures moderated, but the separation felt artificial now. Calloway found himself inviting them for meals, seeking their company rather than his previous solitude. In late February, Howard Ellison arrived with news. Thanks to Colonel Whitmore's intervention and a thorough review of their cases, Müller and Brigitte had been cleared of any significant concerns. However, a new complication had emerged. The German government is hesitant to accept the return of former military personnel, Ellison explained, particularly those with specialized knowledge. The Soviet occupation of East Germany has complicated matters further. What does that mean for them? Calloway asked. They have options, Ellison replied. They can apply for permanent residency in the United States. Jobs are available for women with their skills, particularly in the western states where labor shortages continue. That evening, Calloway found Müller by the fence line, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Ellison told you about the change in plans? He asked, joining her. She nodded. We have been discussing options. Some wish to return to Germany despite the difficulties. Others are considering staying in America. And you? Müller was silent for a long moment. I have nothing waiting in Germany. My home is in Soviet territory now. My family is gone. She turned to face him. But here we have built something. Not just repaired buildings, but perhaps repaired ourselves as well. You're welcome to stay, Calloway said simply. All of you if you want. The ranch has plenty of room, more than I can work alone. Is that what you want, James? It was the first time she had used his given name. Yes, Elsa, he replied, the unfamiliar syllables of her name feeling right on his tongue. I think it is. Spring arrived with unexpected swiftness, snow melting to reveal green shoots pushing through the earth. The women who had decided to return to Germany, 5 of them, including Greta, prepared for their departure with mixed emotions. The remaining 5, led by Müller, began making plans for permanent settlement, discussing with Calloway how the ranch might be expanded, improved, made profitable again. On a warm April day, Frank Billings arrived with his wife and 2 grown daughters, bringing a picnic lunch and neighborly curiosity about the changes at Calloway's ranch. What might have once been an awkward encounter instead became a pleasant afternoon of conversation and connection. Never thought I'd see the day, Billings remarked to Calloway as they watched the women chatting with his family. You hosting garden parties and such. Life takes unexpected turns, Calloway replied. That it does, Billings agreed. War ends, enemies become neighbors, and the most stubborn loner in Ravalli County finds himself surrounded by German women. He chuckled. Sounds like one of those radio dramas my wife listens to. Calloway smiled, another change that had come gradually over the months. Stranger than fiction, Frank. Later that week, Howard Ellison made his final official visit, bringing citizenship paperwork for those staying and travel documents for those returning to Germany. As they completed the forms in Calloway's dining room, Ellison took him aside. I must admit, when I first brought these women here, I never expected this outcome, he confessed. I thought you'd tolerate them at best. So did I, Calloway acknowledged. Shows what we both knew. The department considers this program a success, Ellison continued, a model for potential future resettlement efforts. Calloway shook his head. Not a program, Ellison, just people finding common ground. On the day of departure for those returning to Germany, emotions ran high. Tearful embraces, promises to write, exchanges of small, meaningful gifts. Greta pressed a handwritten cookbook into Calloway's hands, her family recipes translated into careful English. You will make these, she instructed firmly, and think of us." "I will," he promised. As the government car disappeared down the driveway, carrying 5 women toward their uncertain future in a rebuilding homeland, Calloway felt Müller, Elsa, beside him. "It is strange," she said quietly, "to have survived so much together only to separate now." "Not all separations are endings," Calloway replied. "Some are just new beginnings." They turned back toward the ranch buildings where Hannah, Brigitte, Lise, and Anna waited, the new core of what Calloway had begun to think of as family. The land stretched before them, not just 500 acres of Montana soil, but a future neither could have imagined when war had shaped their separate paths. That evening, as they gathered around the dining table, no longer divided into Americans and Germans, hosts and guests, victors and defeated, Calloway looked at the faces illuminated by lamplight and recognized the transformation that had occurred. These women had arrived as strangers, former enemies bearing the label of prisoners. Now they were partners, contributors, essential threads in the fabric of this place. In the years that followed, the ranch flourished under their combined efforts. The women brought European agricultural techniques that complemented Calloway's American methods. They expanded into new crops, added livestock, and eventually opened the first German-style bakery in Hamilton, with Brigitte managing the business aspects while Anna and Lise handled production. Word of their unusual community spread, drawing visitors and eventually other displaced Europeans seeking new beginnings in Montana's expansive landscape. The bunkhouse was expanded, then supplemented with additional cabins as the community grew. Calloway and Elsa married in 1951, a union that raised eyebrows among some, but was celebrated enthusiastically by those who had witnessed their journey from suspicion to respect to love. Frank Billings served as best man, his wife playing the piano as Hannah walked Elsa down the aisle of Hamilton's small chapel. Occasionally, letters arrived from Germany, updates from Greta and the others who had returned, stories of rebuilding, of new lives constructed from the rubble of the old. Their experiences paralleled those on the ranch in many ways: the gradual healing, the discovery of unexpected joy amid loss, the forging of new connections where old ones had been severed. In 1955, a journalist from Life magazine discovered their story and arrived to document what he called an extraordinary experiment in post-war reconciliation. The resulting article, titled "Enemies No More, The Remarkable Ranch Where Peace Was Made," brought national attention and a flood of letters from veterans and European refugees alike, many seeking guidance on their own journeys toward healing. Calloway, never comfortable with publicity, nevertheless recognized the importance of their example. "We didn't set out to prove anything," he told the journalist. "We just found our way forward together. Maybe that's all reconciliation really is, people doing the work of living side by side until the labels fall away." By 1960, the ranch had transformed into a thriving agricultural enterprise with a reputation for innovation and quality. The women who had arrived as displaced persons had become respected community members, their accents no longer drawing curious stares in town, their contributions recognized beyond the boundaries of Ravalli County. Looking back, Calloway often reflected on the strange alchemy that had transformed enforced proximity into genuine community. The government program that placed enemy aliens on his property had been, in Ellison's bureaucratic vision, merely a temporary solution to a logistical problem. None involved could have predicted it would become a model of post-war healing, a testament to the resilience of human connections in the aftermath of global conflict. On cool Montana evenings, when the mountains turned purple against the fading light, Calloway and Elsa sometimes sat on the porch of the now well-maintained farmhouse, watching the activities of their extended family across the property. Lisa's children playing near the barn, Hannah instructing apprentice carpenters, Brigitte reviewing ledgers with new employees. "Did you ever imagine this?" Elsa asked once, gesturing toward the vibrant life unfolding before them. "When you returned from war?" "Never," Calloway admitted. "I expected silence until the end of my days, maybe even wanted it." "And now?" He took her hand. Still strong and capable after years of building something neither could have envisioned alone. "Now I know better. Silence doesn't heal wounds. People do." In the distance, The descendants of the wounded deer Lisa had treated years before grazed peacefully at the edge of the eastern field. Above them, an eagle circled in wide, patient arcs, a hunter, yes, but also a symbol of freedom that had come to mean something new to those who had found unexpected liberation on this Montana ranch. "The Americans have a saying," Elsa remarked, following his gaze to the soaring bird. "Out of many one, e pluribus unum." "Yes," Calloway nodded. "Turns out it applies to more than just states." Their story, unusual though it was, echoed thousands of others playing out across America and Europe as former enemies learned to build peace together. What made theirs remarkable was perhaps only the unlikelihood of its beginning. A solitary, embittered Marine and 10 German women thrown together by bureaucratic necessity, finding in each other not just survival, but revival. The sun dipped below the mountains, casting long shadows across land that had witnessed their transformation from strangers to family. Another day ended on the ranch where healing had come in unexpected form, where the aftermath of war had given way to the patient work of peace. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.